Okay, great. I think we are live and we can go on if you just give me a quick nudge on the chat to let me know that we are live. It's working. You guys hear me? Then I can kick it off from my side. So I'm hearing no signs opposite than that. So let's start. Well, first of all, great to be here. This event organized by MIT Tech Rabia, and it's a pleasure for me to be able to share some reflections and equally so engaging with the Q&A that will emerge afterwards and facilitated by Dia. I think we're living in a quite interesting period of history where we are realizing that the nature of work is going to change by its own definition of what is actually going to the workplace. And I guess by now you have already seen multiple examples throughout the conference of how we are moving into a direction that unlikely will see any reversibility from the past. The conversation I'd like to have with you today is more related to how do we see that workplace as we're moving forward. So the first conversation is related to the kind of revolution we're currently experiencing. You know, if we like to imagine the revolution that we had in the past, organized by industrial revolutions, information revolution, which were really what happened throughout the cusp of the last 7-8 decades. We're now entering into what is a cognitive revolution, which is definitely driven by a significant role that technology has in redefining some of our most important relationships and tenets. We've been talking about the future of work several times, but this time, I guess, is important to understand how artificial intelligence can equally help accelerate and facilitate the transformation of the workplace. As you know, I co-founded together with other fellows a company called Nexus FrontierTech. And at Nexus, we produce a number of different applied research. But in 2019, together with two of the co-founders, Terence C. and Danigo, we produced actually a book called The AI Republic. And in the book, in the AI Republic, at one point in time, we're talking about the fact that organizations that are moving into a strategy of utilizing artificial intelligence for their effectiveness, they should not necessarily think about using AI to replace jobs. They should think about using AI to redesign tasks. And the first part of the conversation I'd like to have with you is really around that. So what is the difference? If I'm thinking about redesigning a job, likely I will start creating a culture of efficiency in which jobs performed by humans might be equally performed by machines, and the level of equation is not necessarily always in favor of humans. So what happens if suddenly I start thinking about the task rather than thinking about the job? Well, if we start thinking about the task, we start thinking in which way we can optimize the task so that we can free jobs of repetitive tasks that are not necessarily adding too much value, neither to the organization or to the individual, so that we can expand the scope of the job by integrating technology within it. I think this is a fundamental point of what I'm trying to share with you today. We're not necessarily here to think about the future of workplace being replaced by automation or machines in general. I think we're here to say the future of a workplace is pretty much of a relationship of how do we integrate technology so that we are reforming the idea of task. Once we reform the idea of task, likely we reform the idea of jobs in the same place. So it's a quite important difference from what we hear sometimes in a bit of more of a constructive way of reframing technology in the right place. This takes me to the next set of conversation. So the next set of conversation is, why have we been so afraid about technology suddenly taking over? Well, the answer to that is that our current workplaces that were designed many years back when technology was not even close to the level of opportunities that it offers today. In one of the most popular video that I show during my lectures, which is called "Human Need Not Apply," there's an interesting part of that specific production that talks about the number of jobs in the United States 100 years back and today. And to my surprise, that work identified roughly 50% of the jobs that existed back 100 years ago still existing today. So is the challenge about jobs being replaced a challenge that is coming out of a surprise, or is it more about the obsolete nature of jobs? I'm much more into this side of the opinions in which the obsolete nature of jobs designed when technology wasn't even close to the level we're talking right now is something that will push many of these jobs to be automated. So it's not really much about the conversation related to whether or not we'll be replaced. I think there's more about a conversation whether we'll be able to use technology to design jobs that are much more 21st century friendly. What you hear all the time, future fit, but equally jobs that are not necessarily integrating a trade-off between humans and machines, but they're integrating a sort of symbiosis between humans and machines. And this is where I like to take you as we're moving into, so like, what is the proposition here? Well, the proposition is to start thinking more actively about how technology is going to augment jobs, in this case, through the rethinking about tasks, rather than technology being measured directly. And I'm going to try to tell you why this is important and how do we imagine the boundaries that are important to take into account when we go in that direction. So the reason why this is important is because the number of jobs that will likely be replaced ahead of us within the next few years depends greatly on the nature of the job. You can think about jobs divided into either a social kind of job or asocial, so in contact with people, or more on a solo basis. And then you can start thinking about jobs that are much more driven by strategy and creativity, in which you have a minimal amount of repetition. Or on the other side of the spectrum, you can think of jobs that are likely to be optimized. They can be improved because they can be enhanced in their efficiency outcome. So any jobs, regardless that we're talking about social or anti or asocial jobs, or jobs that are more, let's say, of a professional kind of sphere, or more of a labor kind of sphere. So let's think about productions jobs that will naturally be imposed on the replacement will be imposed on the ability for us to imagine, will this job be more on the side of creativity and strategy? Therefore, we'll be able to see them flourish by redesigning the integration between technology and the task itself, or will this job likely are already being designed with so much level of repetition that sooner or later there will be no other scenario but the one being displaced. So likely the nature of the job will position the possibility around replacement or not. So there's a lot of the design itself that already tells us a lot of stories. The other side of the story that is equally important is to also demystify a common misconception. We'll think that every single job in the world will actually be impacted by automation. Well, first of all, this is not true. But the second thing is that even if that is true, it might impact roughly one job out of four. So we're looking at a displacement rate of roughly 25%. And even if that is true, it depends greatly on where we are. In countries where the per capita tends to be lower than $12,000, $13,000 per capita, it's still cheaper to hire people to do jobs that rather than investing in technologies that are asset rich, which equally also means quite capital intensive and with consequent liabilities. So there are a significant number of jobs today in the world that are going to be preserved by humans, primarily because it's cheaper, as a matter of fact. We're talking about roughly 1.3 jobs out of 10 that might be exposed to automation in country with a lower per capita. So it's important for us to imagine that the conversation on displacement of jobs are important, but they are very much contextual to where we are and what kind of markets that we're dealing with. It's important that I tell you this because it's really within the stage of economic development that we'll see more or less displacement of jobs. And going back to what I said before, it depends whether we're dealing with a creativity and strategy-based job or more about an optimization-based job. These are important differentiation to create a bit of a compass in rethinking about the workplace in the future, just for you to know that certain things will change. Artificial intelligence is on its way to become even more predominant, but not necessarily in the way we hear on some running titles on media. So what's the solution? Well, I think we now know that the way forward is to create what we call symbiointelligence. This is a terminology that we use with my colleagues as well, colleagues at Cambrian Futures, colleagues at Nexus FrontierTech. We're really thinking about the fact that technology integrating humans is designed to expand the capacity that humans really have. There are certain areas that I do think we should be extremely careful to make sure that we're simply creating ethical boundaries, not necessarily allowing technology to violate or breach. There is definitely the ability for us to start thinking about identity and everything related to the persona that should be like a sacred territory. It's not necessarily going to be impacted, and it should be the conversation around determinism of algorithms, so that we're having algorithms that are not necessarily going to draw choices bypassing entirely human agency. I think these are important because we want to make sure that we are never necessarily using technology as a proxy for an absolute decision making that is completely bypassing humans, number one, but equally there's equally judging humans in the first place. I think these are some of the conversations to have. Then the application, I think they're just limitless. From a very famous paper that was introduced by MIT, that used to talk about how more effective doctors could be by integrating algorithm, like for example IBM Watson, in predicting and forecasting, let's say, propensity to cancer, rather than having the two different indicators running on their own. To the opportunity to have mapping of climate scenarios that will help scientists and environmental researchers to best understand the impact of climate change and how do we have a reflection around human geography or economic geography. These are some of the examples in which, for example, healthcare or climate change, the use of AI is still heavily underutilized, and we can really start thinking more and more about a more systematic integration of AI within the jobs that we currently have by expanding the scope of the jobs. And there is also an opportunity for us to start changing a bit of the perspective. We sometimes think a lot about making machines smarter or more intelligent. We hardly talk about how do we use machines to make us smarter. And this is an application that can be applied to so many different contexts, from children with learning disabilities and how we can use technology to really help them to be less marginalized, to people suffering of diseases that are degenerative, for example, loss of memory. And how do we use technology like AI to regain memory, which you would agree with me, memory is identity in many ways. So there's so many different applications about rethinking the workplace of tomorrow that is not just about physical workplace, but the old concept about what is a job these days, that likely will be an impactful force for transformation in the next few years. And I'd like to finish with my last minute before engaging the conversation with Dia in, where do I see, nonetheless, right, the conversation on workforce going. So I'll read some of them. I'll read to you some of the numbers that I play in my mind lately that I think are quite reassuring. The first thing is that we'll change the way we work fundamentally because we're changing the way we're dealing with each other. And the pandemic has simply amplified and accelerated the process that had already started, but hadn't yet finished. And I think we're now seeing a significant boost of that. Not only will have more productivity when you're integrating technology and we're adding more GDP, hopefully by distributing that GDP through jobs, but we're equally going to see the rise of jobs that we've never seen before. So there's an interesting estimate that talks about roughly 65% of new jobs that currently do not exist will be created by 2035. And within the last 5 years, just for you to have a sense that this transformation has already started, the skill sets required at work have already changed by roughly 35%. So this is just to show you that we are at the very beginning of a significant transformation of future work. Technology has a critical role in helping us define the right level of engagement. We have a unique opportunity to think of technology as a way to enhance the way we are, rather than thinking technology as a direct competitors to our skills. And my hope for our conversation is that we'll start looking more and more of technology as part of an ally, that it will enhance us, rather than thinking of technology as a threat. And I will tell you, and this is my very final sentence, a very good friend of mine, his name is Nicholas Davis. We've been working together for a while. He was at the World Economic Forum and one of the architects of the fourth industrial revolution. always reminds me that technology is a collective design. It is what we make of it. So how will we make the future workplace depends greatly on the conversation we'll have. Also, the conversation we'll have in places like this, where we have a concentration of ideas, participants, and of course, insights that are quite remarkable. So this is everything I wanted to share with you in my 50 minutes with you, and I look forward to the conversation with you now.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
Hey, Dia, good to see you.
Always good to see you and host you. Thank you so much for this. I found the idea of technology being collective design very interesting. It's actually very true. We have a lot of questions, so let's see what we can take with the time we have. First is,
Sure.
which industries do you see AI collaborating more with employees?
So I think medical and healthcare, especially through COVID time, has seen a boost of the use of technology. And now I think technology has become a bit of a commodity. Think about contact tracing apps and the relationship they have with medical workers. This is an example where this is probably a successful example of integration. And we went there out of needs. I think also retailing, commerce, and everything related to the acceleration of online retailing that had to be attached also with logistics. If you're thinking about in the UAE, how developed it is, the logistic network of deliveries, right? From food to, items to Amazon. These are examples where industry have integrated AI as a way of enhancing the service, but they haven't integrated AI as a way of replacing jobs. I think it's the same Amazon that throughout its last few months has hired more people to their operation than ever before. So I think it supports the theory we've been sharing during my talk, that integrating technology does not necessarily replace jobs; it just changes the nature of the jobs.
Yeah, and that's something most of our speakers agreed on actually today and mentioned. Another question is, as a unit director in the private sector, how can I encourage my company to use AI to help build more engaged workforce?
So I think that's a great question. I think it always starts by saying, first of all, do I need AI? Right? It's always actually a basic question. Sometimes the answer is not AI at first, is some proper digital transformation that I know that in the magazine you guys been covering a lot with different articles and different speakers, right? So this is a topic that I think also in the region is becoming quite predominant. So sometimes all we need is a proper start with digital transformation. And I think this is required because no matter who you are, today we are all a technology company. Look at us right now. This is a conference organized by a publishing house, but we're using a technology platform to do this, right? So we are, to some extent, a technology. We are experiencing a technology enterprise right now. So I think it's really about first steps. From there, the moment in which you start using questions that are building predictions about efficiency or accuracy in the future, that is, of course, is material for AI because of a predominant use of AI is around machine learning. But before we get into that question, I really think is a healthy relationship with transformation and how do I digitize my current operations.
Okay, we have 1 minute remaining, so we have to select one of the many questions left. How will AI help in increasing engagement levels between remote workers, and if you have any examples that the audience can benefit from?
Yeah. So, AI can definitely start improving the reporting that we actually have some time to manually produce. People working remotely, they are constantly dealing with their laptop, right? And that is a experience that sometimes can be quite fatiguing. I think we're talking often about Zoom fatigue. So AI can really help in automating some of the processes that they are done by people when they are working remotely. That would be the first level. The second thing is to creating more collaboration platforms. I'm not sure whether it's about AI, but I think it's, again, going back to a sound technology strategy where you actually are minimizing a lot some of the transaction that you have on your own in a remote workplace and try to create a much binding collaborative team with people working from around the world. But ultimately, the remote workforce are important and they will continue to be an important driving force of our society, but we cannot forget the physical world. We are, an experience of the physical world in our own experience of life. So I think the ideal would be that remote is integrated into physical of some sort of. I think that would be where I'd see way forward.
A hybrid model.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So we don't have any more time, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you, Dia. It's been great to, first of all, spend some time with you, working with the team in the preparation. And whoever was actually watching this, thanks for tuning in. I know there are many options these days, but it's an honor that they decided to watch my keynote.
They made the good choice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. See you.
All the best. Bye.
Bye.